I had everything I ever wanted, at least that's what I kept telling myself. I was a high-powered attorney, with a corner office and a name that carried weight in the legal world. Every day was a battle, every client a conquest. I had been climbing for years, working harder than anyone else. I wasn't about to slow down now. The Knightbridge merger was the latest win in my book, a complex deal worth $50 million. It had taken weeks of late nights, endless conference calls, and more strategy than I'd ever thought possible. But finally, we sealed it. That deal was everything. It was the kind of victory that got you the recognition you craved, the kind of victory that made you feel untouchable. And yet, as I walked out of that glossy conference room in the Armitage and Blackstone building, something was nagging at me. I should have been happy. I should have been celebrating, toasting to the fact that my career was soaring, that I was on top of my game. Instead, I couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. She'd been my anchor back when everything was just a dream, when I was a nobody with big ideas. But somewhere along the way, ambition had pushed her to the side. Slowly at first, then all at once. Lucas. A voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. I turned to see Robert Steele, the senior partner at the firm, grinning with that knowing look of a man who's seen it all. Robert was silver-haired, around 60, and still sharp as a tack. He was the guy who had mentored me through the tough stuff, the one who'd watched me grow from a rookie into someone the board trusted to close deals like this. "Great work, Lucas," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "You made this happen. The board will be ecstatic. But listen, you can't let this business swallow you whole. When was the last time you had a real dinner with Evelyn? She's been calling the office non-stop." I felt the words hit me like a slap in the face. Evelyn had been calling? I hadn't even noticed. My focus had been so locked in on the deal, the next step, the next victory. How long had it been since we'd sat down together, just the two of us? "Thanks, Robert," I said, trying to brush it off. I smiled, though the praise didn't feel as satisfying as it usually did. "It's been a team effort, as always." Robert didn't let me off that easily. His smile faded, and his eyes grew more serious. "I've seen this happen too many times, Lucas. Good men, smart men, they get lost in the game. They win the battles, but they lose the war. You'll be at the top, but you'll be alone. Trust me." He clapped me on the back, the weight of his words settling in the pit of my stomach. But I didn't have time to dwell. I had a flight to catch and a wife to go home to. Maybe I could make things right. Maybe I could fix what had been broken. Still, as I left the building and got into my car, my mind wandered back to Evelyn. I hadn't meant to neglect her, not really. But work had taken over. And now, as I drove through the bustling streets of the city, something about Robert's warning echoed in my mind. What if it was too late? What if Evelyn had already slipped away, already found someone who didn't leave her alone every night while I was off in boardrooms fighting for my next big win? I shook my head. No, that wasn't happening. I would fix it. I had to. As I sat on the plane, staring out the window at the city lights below, I felt that familiar pull, the pull of home. Cedar Hollow. A quiet suburban neighborhood where Evelyn and I had built our life. The house we'd bought together, the place where we'd dreamed of raising a family. That house should have been the symbol of our future. But now, with every passing day, it felt more and more like a museum of what we used to have. The flight was long enough to let my mind drift, to let memories creep in uninvited. I remembered the first time Evelyn and I walked through the front door of that house, hand in hand, both of us wide-eyed with excitement. She'd squeezed my hand and smiled, that smile of hers that made everything feel like it was possible. We had everything ahead of us. But now it felt like that dream was slipping through my fingers, and I was too late to stop it. As the plane touched down, I felt the exhaustion hit me hard. It had been a long day, a long few weeks, really. But just the thought of seeing Evelyn again, of trying to reconnect, brought a little lightness to my chest. Maybe I could fix it. Maybe we could still find our way back to each other. I drove out of the airport and headed home, the night creeping in around me as the quiet streets of Cedar Hollow unfolded ahead. The neighborhood looked almost the same, though the world felt different. Like something was changing. I took a deep breath as I turned onto Silver Oaks Drive. And there it was. The house. But something was off. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. Evelyn's car, a sleek black sedan, was parked in its usual spot, but it wasn't quite right. It wasn't aligned properly, not in the usual way. It was just a little off, angled weird, as if she'd been in a rush or didn't care to park neatly. I didn't think much of it at first. I was exhausted, my mind still swirling with the day's work, and all I really wanted was to step inside and feel some semblance of normalcy. I wanted to hear Evelyn's voice, maybe have a glass of wine, talk about the things we hadn't talked about in far too long. But as I turned off the engine and got out of the car, a strange unease started to creep up on me. The porch light, which Evelyn always made sure to switch on when she knew I was coming home late, was off. That was odd. She was always so meticulous about little things like that. The porch light was a detail that wasn't even on my radar anymore, but it was on hers. So why had she forgotten it tonight? I shrugged it off. Maybe she was just tired, too. I walked up the steps, the familiar creak of the porch under my boots sounding out of place in the quiet night. But as I reached for the door, that feeling intensified. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to send a wave of cold panic rushing through me. Now, this wasn't normal. Evelyn was cautious about security. She'd grown up in a rough neighborhood, and she'd always been the one to double-check locks, to make sure windows were secure before we went to bed. She would never leave the door unlocked, especially not at this hour. I stood there for a moment, hand frozen on the doorknob, my pulse pounding in my ears. I pushed the door open, slowly, cautiously, calling out her name. Evelyn. My voice sounded foreign, like a stranger's voice echoing in my own house. There was no answer, just silence. I stepped inside, setting my briefcase down on the table by the door, the weight of it suddenly insignificant. The house was darker than usual, and the usual hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the lights, the life that filled our home, was absent. Everything felt off. I called her name again, louder this time. Evelyn. Still nothing. My stomach twisted. The house felt colder now, emptier. It was as if the walls were closing in around me. I climbed the stairs slowly, trying to shake the sense of dread that had settled deep in my chest. The silence was suffocating. And then, at the top of the stairs, I saw it. A faint glint of something metallic, catching the dim light from the hallway. I froze. My mind raced. Was it a reflection of something? A shadow playing tricks on me? But no. It was a knife, just lying there on the floor, half hidden beneath the wooden boards in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that knife. It was one of the good ones we had, the one Evelyn had insisted we get when we moved into the house. It was sharp, expensive, and I'd never seen it left lying around like this before. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and instinctively, I stepped forward, my breath shallow, my senses on high alert. Evelyn. I called again, but this time my voice cracked. I didn't want to believe it. I kept walking, one step at a time, my eyes fixed on that knife. I didn't know what I was expecting, but what I saw when I reached the top of the stairs made everything inside me freeze. There she was. Evelyn. Standing in the hallway, bathed in the faint light that came from the staircase, her figure a shadow of what I remembered. Her eyes, once warm and full of life, were cold, detached, and her lips, those lips I used to kiss in the quiet of the night, were twisted into something I couldn't quite place. A smile? Or something more sinister? My breath hitched. Something in me knew this wasn't just a bad night, or an argument. This was something deeper, darker. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, there was a flicker of recognition. But then she spoke, her voice low, soft, almost too calm. Lucas. She took a step toward me, and in her hand that damn knife. She held it casually, almost lovingly, as though it was some kind of token, some kind of trophy. The sight made my stomach churn. You thought you could abandon me, she whispered, her voice sharp, like the edge of the knife she was holding. You thought you could leave me here, alone, while you built your little empire. All those late nights, all those phone calls, all those deals you made while I was sitting here waiting for you. What did you lose, Lucas? What did you lose in the process? I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. She knew. She knew all along. All the neglect. All the hours I spent away from her, convincing myself that the success, the money, would make up for it. But it hadn't. It hadn't made up for the empty nights, the quiet dinners that turned into silence. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't breathe. And then, just like that, she stepped forward, and with a brutal, swift motion, she drove the knife into my side. I gasped, my body jerking back as the pain hit like a wave. Cold, sharp, and consuming. "You wanted to succeed, Lucas," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart in my ears. "Well, now you have it. You got everything you wanted. But you never saw the price, did you?" Everything blurred as I stumbled back, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what was happening. But all I could feel was the searing pain, the blood rushing from the wound as I gasped for air. And in that moment, it hit me. Everything I had fought for, everything I thought I wanted, had led me to this. To this broken, bitter woman standing before me, holding my life in her hands. Evelyn had finally had enough. And I was too late to stop it. The world spun around me. My head felt light, like I was floating above my own body, watching this nightmare unfold from a distance. The pain in my side was unbearable, but I couldn't focus on it. My thoughts were scrambled, hazy, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Evelyn didn't step back. She didn't seem to care about the blood soaking through my shirt. She just stood there, that twisted smile still plastered on her face, her eyes cold, calculating. "You always were so focused on your damn career," she said, almost like she was making small talk, like we were discussing the weather. "You thought everything else could wait. But now look at you. Look at what you've done to us." She shook her head slowly, like she was disappointed in me. I couldn't find my voice. My mouth felt dry, my limbs heavy. The world around me started to blur as I tried to stay on my feet, as I tried to stay alive. My hand instinctively went to my side, where the blood was flowing freely. The pain was a jagged thing, stabbing through me with every breath I took. I could feel the warmth of it spreading through my shirt, through my hands, but it wasn't enough to stop me from trying to speak. "Evelyn, why?" The words were weak, barely a whisper, but they cut through the air between us like an open wound. She didn't flinch. She didn't even seem surprised to hear my voice. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes narrowing as she took a slow step toward me. "Why?" she repeated, her voice low and dangerous, like a snake ready to strike. "You want to know why, Lucas?" She laughed. Just a short, bitter laugh. "You thought you could walk away from me, from everything we had, from us. You built your empire. You built your fucking towers and made all your money. But what did I get? What did I get from all your late nights and your endless deals?" She paused, her eyes flickering with something dark, resentment, maybe, before she took another step closer. "I gave you everything, Lucas. My time, my love, my trust, and you threw it all away. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't feel the distance between us growing? The nights you weren't there? The days I spent waiting for you to look at me like you used to?" Her voice cracked on the last words, but it wasn't from emotion. It was more like the crack of a whip, sharp and bitter. I wanted to say something, to apologize, to beg her to stop, but I couldn't. My vision was swimming, and the floor was tilting beneath me. The only thing I could do was stand there, helpless, feeling the life drain out of me with every beat of my heart. Evelyn took another step forward, now standing just a few feet from me. I could barely stay upright. My body was starting to give out, but my mind was still racing. Was this it? Was this the end? "You weren't there for me, Lucas," she said, her voice low, almost soft now. But it was cruel in its softness, like a caress before a strike. "So I had to find someone who would be. Someone who would see me, even if it meant I had to break you first." Her words hit me like a sucker punch, and I could feel my legs trembling beneath me. She had found someone else, hadn't she? It wasn't just the work, it wasn't just my neglect. It was that she had already moved on. She had already filled the hole I had left behind, and she had done it long before this moment. "Who is he?" I managed to croak out, my throat burning. The smile on her face faltered for just a second, but it was enough to tell me everything. She didn't need to say a word. I already knew. Does it matter, Lucas? She tilted her head, almost mockingly. You never cared enough to ask. You were too busy with your damn mergers and partnerships to notice when I stopped being your priority. I couldn't argue with her. The truth was right there in front of me, raw and undeniable. I had been so obsessed with climbing the ladder, with getting to the top, that I didn't see how far I had fallen from the person who used to matter to me most. The person who had been my partner, my equal, and my love. And now, as I stood here, bleeding on the floor of the house we had built, I realized the weight of everything I had lost. Evelyn wasn't the woman I had married anymore. The woman who had once stood by my side, my equal, had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who was capable of this. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to shatter everything we had left. She took a final step closer, her cold eyes never leaving mine. The knife in her hand gleamed in the dim light, the reflection of it sharp and deadly. I hope you understand now, Lucas, she whispered, almost pitying. I gave you everything. And in the end, it wasn't enough. And then, without a second thought, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound of her leaving, the sound of her walking away from me, was the final blow. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, like I was sinking into the ground with nothing left to hold on to. My life was slipping away, and I couldn't even bring myself to fight anymore. I sank to my knees, the world around me spinning wildly, and all I could think of was how I had let it all go. How everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of, had led to this moment. And in the silence of that house, as the blood pooled beneath me, I realized just how completely and utterly shattered I had become. The pain in my side felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. My body was failing me, slowly, quietly. But my mind was wide awake, painfully aware of every single moment. The seconds dragged on, slow and suffocating, as I sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall of the hallway. My hands were pressed to the wound, but it felt like trying to hold back a flood with a paper towel. The blood kept coming, soaking through my fingers, spreading across my shirt. I couldn't focus on the pain anymore. It had become this dull throb, a constant companion that I couldn't escape. Instead, all I could think about was Evelyn. Why? I had failed her. I knew that now. I had failed her in every way possible. And now, here we were. Me bleeding out on the floor, her walking away from me like I was just another obstacle she'd outgrown. She'd gotten what she wanted. She didn't need me anymore. She had moved on, found someone else to fill the space I had abandoned. I could hear her footsteps fading as she left the house, the sound echoing through the empty halls. And just like that, the house felt even colder, even more distant. This wasn't the home we'd dreamed of. This was just a shell, a place where memories now felt like ghosts, faint, fading, and just out of reach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for help. But I didn't have the strength anymore. The coldness in my limbs was spreading, and my vision was growing dim. Is this how it ends? I thought. Alone. Betrayed. Forgotten. I wasn't even sure how much time had passed. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape the crushing reality of what had just happened. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was every promise we'd ever made to each other, every dream we'd built, shattered in a single bloody moment. Evelyn had taken everything. I could feel my life slipping away, the blood pooling beneath me, but even in that haze of pain and regret, my mind wouldn't let go of the one thing that still stung the most. The one thing I couldn't quite process. How had I been so blind? How had I been so consumed by my own ambition that I couldn't see the cracks forming in front of me? The cracks in our relationship, in her. The phone calls she had made, the silent nights she had endured, the way she had stopped looking at me the way she used to. I should have seen it. I should have seen her pulling away, should have heard her silent pleas. But I was too busy. Too focused on the next win, the next deal. Too busy trying to prove myself, to justify the years I'd spent working, trying to make it all worth something. But what had I really built? A career. Sure. A reputation? Yeah. But I had nothing now. Nothing except the blood on my hands, the silence around me, and the ghost of a woman I once loved. I took a shaky breath, my chest heaving with the effort. The house was too quiet now. There was no noise, no sign of life. It was just me and the weight of everything that had led me here. I wanted to call out to her, "Evelyn, please," but the words caught in my throat. There was no point anymore, was there? She had already made up her mind. She'd already cut me out. And now, I was just the remains of a man who had once thought he had everything. I felt my head sag, my body leaning against the wall, every breath an effort. There was no light at the end of this tunnel. No redemption. No second chances. I was done. Somehow, I don't know how long I sat there, still and unmoving, but I heard something. A sound that broke the thick silence. Footsteps. Soft, hesitant at first. Someone was approaching. I couldn't believe it. Was it her? Was it Evelyn coming back, realizing what she had done? But the steps weren't the hurried, angry ones I'd heard earlier. They were slower, more measured, like someone who was unsure, someone who was walking carefully toward me, maybe out of fear or regret. Then I heard a voice. "Lucas?" The voice was familiar. It was the voice of someone who knew me well, someone who cared. But it wasn't Evelyn. My heart skipped a beat, though every movement felt like it was draining the last bit of strength I had left. It was Robert. Robert Steele. My mentor. The one man who had always been there for me, the one who had warned me about losing myself in this damn game. He must have come looking for me after the call I'd made to the office earlier, the one where I mentioned I'd be heading home. I could hear him calling my name again, louder now, panic creeping into his voice as he reached the hallway. "Lucas! God damn it, are you okay?" He came into view then, and for the first time all night, I felt a sense of something like relief. But it wasn't enough. The edges of my vision were blurring, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. I need help," I gasped, the words barely leaving my lips. My body was failing me, but I couldn't let go. Not yet. Not like this. Robert was kneeling next to me in an instant, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the blood that was spilling from my side. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "God, Lucas, what the hell happened? Who did this to you?" His voice cracked, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He was trying to be strong for me, trying to do what he could, but I knew there was nothing he could do. It was too late. I could hear the distant sound of sirens in the background, but it felt so far away, so irrelevant. The world was slipping away, and I was being pulled into the black void, the place where all my regrets, my failures, and my shattered ambitions would finally be swallowed whole. And then, as everything faded, I heard one last thing. "I'm sorry, Lucas," Robert whispered, his voice trembling. And that was it. The last breath I took felt like the final blow, the end of a life that had been defined by ambition, pride, and ultimately betrayal. I don't know how long it took, or if I even really left the world. The darkness was thick, but I could still feel things around me, hear things. It was like I was trapped between two realities, one where everything was falling apart, and one where I was trying to hold on to some shred of control. And then there was a light. It wasn't bright or harsh, just a soft glow, like the world had decided to soften around me. I couldn't tell if it was real or just part of the mess inside my head. But it was there, and it felt like a doorway that would lead me out of the nightmare. The sirens had gotten louder before everything went quiet again. Someone must have called 911 after Robert showed up. Probably him, but the sound of that emergency vehicle seemed so distant, like it belonged to a different story. My story was already ending, wasn't it? I opened my eyes, not sure if I really had, or if I was still floating somewhere in between. The light above me was harsh now, blinking and buzzing like a broken light bulb. The sterile smell hit me next. Hospital air, sharp and clean. I was in a bed. I could feel the cold of the sheets, the steady beep of a heart monitor somewhere nearby. I groaned trying to move, but my body felt heavy, so damn heavy. I turned my head slowly, the effort exhausting. My side was wrapped in bandages, and the pain hit me in a wave that made my vision swim again. Hey, take it easy." A voice, familiar but distant, cut through the haze. It was Robert again. He was sitting beside me, a hand on my shoulder, his face etched with worry. His eyes were red, like he hadn't slept in days. His voice was rough, as though he'd been yelling or fighting to keep me alive. "You're lucky you know that?" Robert continued, his voice cracking. "You're damn lucky you didn't bleed out right there. The EMTs, they said it was touch and go for a while." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his hand over his face like he couldn't quite believe what had happened. "But you're here. You're alive. You've got a second chance, Lucas." "A second chance?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, like someone had poured sand down it. It took all the strength I had to croak out a word. "How? You don't remember?" Robert's eyebrows furrowed. "The paramedics found you. The knife wound wasn't as deep as we thought, but you lost a lot of blood. If it wasn't for your damn luck." "How is she?" I cut him off, my voice hoarse. "Evelyn. How is she?" Robert blinked, like he hadn't expected me to ask about her, but the hesitation in his eyes told me everything. It was a long beat before he spoke again. "She's gone, Lucas. I don't know where. The cops tried to get a hold of her, but she's gone. They searched the house. There's no sign of her." His voice softened, like he didn't want to say what was coming next. "She left before the ambulance even got there. There's no trace of her anywhere." I felt my heart drop into the pit of my stomach. Gone. Just like that. No explanation. No remorse. A cold, bitter laugh bubbled up in my chest, but it was strangled by the raw pain in my side. I tried to shift in the bed, but my body wasn't ready for it, and I winced as the stab of agony surged through me. "She left me," I mumbled, more to myself than to Robert. "Yeah," Robert said, his voice tight with something like sympathy or regret. "She left you to die in that house, man. I'm sorry." I could barely process what he was saying. The words didn't make sense. They didn't match the reality I had known. I'd spent so long trying to keep my marriage alive, trying to convince myself that I could fix the damage I'd done by focusing on everything else but her. But Evelyn, she'd checked out long before I even realized it. And now, here I was, surviving by a thread, in a hospital bed, surrounded by strangers, with nothing left. The silence between us grew thick, uncomfortable. Robert didn't know what to say, and honestly, neither did I. I could hear the beeping of the machines, the dull thrum of life in this sterile room. But all I could think about was how quiet the world had become. How much had been left unsaid, unfinished. How much had been lost. "She never loved me, did she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert didn't answer at first. I don't think he knew how to answer. Or maybe he couldn't, because deep down, we both knew the truth. Evelyn had loved the man I used to be. The one who was present, who cared. But that man had been replaced by someone consumed with ambition, someone who couldn't see what was slipping through his fingers. The person I was now. I wasn't sure if there was anything left to love. Not from Evelyn. Not from anyone. "You were just too busy for her," Robert finally said, his voice quiet. "Too busy, too focused on everything but her. And she couldn't keep waiting forever." I closed my eyes, and for a second, the weight of it all felt too heavy. "Where do I go from here?" I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I was asking Robert or just thinking out loud. "What's left, man? What's left for me?" Robert let out a long, heavy breath, like he was trying to find the right words. But then, he just shook his head. "I don't know, Lucas. I don't know what happens next. But you've got a chance now. That's all I can say. A chance. A chance at what? To rebuild? To try again? To get my life back?" I didn't know. I didn't even know if I could anymore. But what I did know, the one thing that was clear through all the haze and confusion, was this. Evelyn was gone. And I had lost everything. The days passed in a blur. Doctors came in, checked on me, but it all felt like a distant background hum. The only thing that kept me tethered to the present was the slow, methodical healing of my body. But my mind couldn't heal. It couldn't escape the thoughts of what I had done, what I had allowed, the choices I had made. It wasn't just Evelyn I had lost. It was myself. I spent days in that hospital bed, trying to convince myself I wasn't just waiting to die. The doctor said I was recovering well enough physically, but I knew better. The worst of it wasn't the wound. It wasn't the blood loss or the pain in my side. The worst part was the emptiness, the feeling that I was slowly becoming a ghost of the man I used to be. The life I had built, the career I had sacrificed everything for, none of it mattered anymore. Not when the woman I thought I loved had ripped it all away in a single cruel act. Evelyn had disappeared. I tried to hold on to the hope that she'd come back, that she'd realize the mistake she'd made, that somehow we'd fix this. But deep down, I knew it was over. I had pushed her too far, neglected her for too long. And she had moved on, with someone else, I was sure of it. She had found what I couldn't give her, and now, I was left with nothing. The days blurred into one another. The nurses were kind enough, but they didn't know me. They didn't know my story. They didn't know what it was like to be betrayed by the one person you trusted with everything. I'd gotten the call from the police, or rather, Robert had. He'd insisted on keeping me updated, even though he knew how much it would hurt. Evelyn was nowhere to be found. Her car was gone. No signs of her at the house. The cops had checked her social media, but it was all wiped clean, like she had erased every trace of herself from the world. Gone. Just like that. I wanted to scream, to curse her, to shake her awake from whatever fantasy she had built. But instead, I just sat there in silence. The world had become a dull ache I couldn't escape from. And the more I tried to force myself to feel something, the emptier I became. The first time I left the hospital, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I couldn't face Silver Oaks Drive. That house. Our house. The place that had once held our dreams felt like a tomb now. Silent, abandoned. So, I stayed with Robert for a while. He didn't ask too many questions. He knew how badly I was breaking, and I think he just wanted to make sure I didn't disappear completely. We talked, if you could call it that. More like I'd ramble about the things that had gone wrong, the ways I'd fucked up, and Robert would listen, but I could tell it wasn't enough. He was an old man, and he had his own life to live. He couldn't carry me forever. One night, after too many glasses of whiskey, I decided to finally face it. I couldn't hide from the wreckage of my life any longer. So, I got in my car, the same car I had driven so many times before, and I drove home. The streetlights on Silver Oaks Drive were dim, like they too had given up on this place. The house loomed ahead of me, its once pristine facade now just a reminder of everything I had lost. I parked the car in the driveway and just sat there, staring at the front door. The porch light wasn't on. The windows were dark. Everything was still. It was so quiet. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was ahead. The door was locked, just like it always had been, but this time it felt different. I wasn't just coming home after a long day of work. I was coming home to face the truth of what had happened, to face the ghost of my past. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing like an omen in the silent house. The air inside smelled stale, like it had been abandoned for a long time. The walls, once filled with laughter and life, felt cold and distant now. I moved through the house quietly, feeling like an intruder in a place that used to be mine. Everything was where it was supposed to be. The couch in the living room, the kitchen table where we'd had dinner so many times, but none of it mattered. None of it felt real anymore. And then I saw it. The photograph. It was on the mantel, right where it always had been, framed in gold. It was a picture of us, taken years ago, before the career took over, before the distance between us grew too wide. I picked it up, my fingers brushing the glass. I could still remember the day it was taken, how Evelyn had smiled at me, that pure, happy smile. We were happy once. Before everything fell apart. I set the photo down again, my hand shaking slightly. I hadn't realized how much I missed her until that moment. It wasn't just the woman she had become. It was the woman she used to be. The woman I had promised to cherish. But I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't take back the years I had spent buried in my work, ignoring her pain, thinking that success would make everything better. And now she was gone. And I was left here, in this empty house, with nothing but my broken ambitions and my failure. I sank down onto the couch, my body heavy with exhaustion. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel, anger, sadness, regret, but all I could feel was the emptiness. The hole where she used to be. What do you do when you lose everything? When the one person who made you feel like you were worth something has walked away? The answer was simple. You keep going. But I wasn't sure I knew how to anymore. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the office. I didn't have the energy for it. The idea of returning to that world, the world of contracts and mergers and high-stakes negotiations, seemed like a cruel joke. What was the point now? Robert called me every day, checking in, but I could tell he was getting frustrated with me. He told me I needed to start living again, that there was more to life than this, that I could rebuild. But what if I didn't want to rebuild? What if I didn't care? I spent my time pacing around the house, trying to shake the feeling of being trapped. Sometimes I'd sit in the backyard, staring at the empty pool, and wonder what my life would look like if I had never taken that first step into corporate ambition. If I had just stayed home, spent more time with Evelyn, listened to her when she needed me. Could I have saved us? Or was this always how it was meant to end? I didn't have answers, but the questions kept coming, like waves crashing into me, one after the other. And all I could do was sit there, powerless, waiting for something to change. But nothing ever did. It wasn't the first time I'd asked myself if I could fix it. But by now, I knew the answer. I could feel the weight of it, the finality of everything that had happened, and it crushed me a little more each day. But somewhere deep down I knew Evelyn wasn't coming back. Not for me, not for anything we'd once had. She was gone, and I had no one to blame but myself. The house felt like a ghost town, a place where memories lingered like dust in the air, but nothing felt real anymore. It was just walls and floors and empty rooms. There were times when I'd sit in the living room, staring at the walls, and I'd swear I could almost hear her voice. But then I'd snap out of it, and the silence would swallow me whole again. But then there was a knock on the door one evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hell, I was barely expecting myself to show up to the house anymore. But there it was. A knock, loud and insistent. I dragged myself to the door, half expecting it to be a solicitor, or maybe one of those damn charity workers who'd knock at all hours, trying to convince you to donate to their cause. But when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't a stranger at all. It was Robert. He was standing there on the doorstep, his face grim, his eyes serious. He wasn't there to check on me, not this time. There was something else in the way he was looking at me, something that told me this was more than just a visit. "Lucas," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." I stepped back, holding the door open for him, too tired to protest, too numb to question what was going on. I didn't even bother asking what he wanted. I just let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table Evelyn and I had eaten so many meals at, and Robert didn't waste any time. "You know, I thought you might pull yourself together eventually," Robert began, his voice thick with disappointment. "I thought that maybe, after a few weeks, you'd realize there's still a life to live, still a way to move forward. But you're still stuck in the past, Lucas. You're stuck in the wreckage of who you were. And it's killing you." I didn't say anything. He was right, of course. I'd been stuck, anchored to the past, clinging to what I'd lost and hoping for a future that would never come. I didn't want to be the one to say this, but Evelyn, he paused, his jaw tightening. "Evelyn's gone. She's made it clear that she's not coming back. And you need to accept that." The word stung like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Of course I knew Evelyn was gone. But hearing Robert say it out loud, felt like the final blow. It was like the last shred of hope I had been holding on to just evaporated. "She's not just gone from the house, Lucas," Robert continued, his voice softer now. "She's gone from your life. And I don't think you understand how much you've let that happen." I dropped my head into my hands, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to face it. But I knew he was right. Robert sighed, pushing his chair back and standing up. "I've known you a long time, kid. And I've seen the way you've sacrificed everything for success. But I think you've forgotten something important along the way. You're not alone in this world, Lucas. You don't have to keep fighting this battle by yourself." I looked up at him, my mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "I don't have anyone left, Robert." He met my gaze with a look I couldn't quite decipher. "No, you don't. Not right now. But you still have the chance to change that. You still have a chance to rebuild. To become the man you were supposed to be, the man you promised to be. I shook my head, the hopelessness clawing at my chest. I don't even know who that man is anymore. Then you'd better figure it out, Robert shot back, his voice firm but not unkind. You've got two choices, Lucas. You can keep wallowing in your mistakes, living in the past. Or you can stop being the man who lost everything. And start being the man who decides to rebuild his life. I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? I'd spent so long building an empire, burying myself in work, thinking that if I just kept pushing, it would all pay off. But it had all been a lie. The trophy, the success, the prestige. It was nothing compared to what I'd lost. I was still lost. But I didn't have to stay lost forever, did I? Robert waited for me to speak, but I couldn't find the words. He just gave me a nod, like he knew the struggle I was facing, like he understood the weight of it all. You can't fix the past, Robert said softly, his voice almost a whisper. But you can choose to do better in the future. It's all up to you now, Lucas. And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me in the silence once again. But this time it was different. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I had a choice. I could keep punishing myself for everything I had lost, or I could do something about it. I wasn't sure how, or even where to start, but the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. Maybe I couldn't undo the damage, but I could at least try to heal. Maybe it wasn't too late to find redemption. I walked to the window, staring out into the darkening night. The world outside seemed so still, but I knew it wasn't. There was life out there, waiting to be lived. And maybe, just maybe, I could still find my way back to it. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.